All right. Can you guys hear me? Test. Is that better? A little bit? Okay. So, welcome to the first adult forum of 2022. We are, as you can see, spending the year 2022 looking at care for creation. We spent last year looking at social inequality and racial injustice. These kind of come out of our mission statements. Our mission statement is welcomed in Christ, called to community, sent to serve. So welcomed in Christ kind of informed our theme for last year, social inequality and racial injustice. How are we going to welcome folks if we, in some ways, don't understand those categories? And then this year, we think about called to community, and we're thinking about how we care for creation. So we'll be spending the year doing a variety of activities. And by the way, these activities happen kind of outside in addition to these yearly themes, but we're just kind of trying to call attention to it and let that inform how we pick our adult forums, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to begin with just a little Genesis here. I'll read this because I realized, when I do this at home, it seems like, oh yeah, that'll be big enough, and then I get in here like, oh wait, that's a little small. So then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. So the idea here is that in creation, when humankind is created, it's in this sort of context of that first verse, that first part. Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. It's in this sort of God's relationship with humankind is then kind of our relationship with creation is a reflection of God's relationship with us. Does that make sense? So when we are created in God's image, it's in a capacity for relationship. The type of, so God, I've said this before, so I know some of you heard this. God is not up in heaven with, like a big beard and flowing white hair, white skin, like that. That's not, and so the closer we are to that sort of image in our heads of what God looks like, the better we are. That's not it at all. It's our capacity for relationship that is the reflection of God. Our ability to care for others, and specifically things that are, and I'm going to put this in quotes, less than us. Right? So we are caring for the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle, wild animal, every creeping thing. We're caring for things that do not have the power that we do, just as God cares for us who do not have the power that God does. Do you guys see the echo there, the reflection? So when you think created in the image of God, it is not a physical image. Because if you do that, then anyone who does not look like whatever God looks like in your mind is less than people who look like God. Does that make sense? So we get into people who, maybe have lost some of their hair, for example, or who have, different types of kind of physical, manifestations of their body, the way their bodies have kind of grown into what they are. If we think about God as being, like our image being physically representing God, then we devalue them. What we should be thinking about is our ability to care for others. That's how we are closer to the image of God. So is this kind of hopefully, I know I've said this before, I've taught this before, but I'm teaching it again, because hopefully this is a radical reconception for you whenever you've heard, oh yeah, we're created in God's image, and your mind immediately thinks the big guy, and I mean guy, in the white robe with the flowing white hair, right? That's not it at all. Elwood?
We had those images, though, from the time we were about 2 years old, when we become implanted in our mind.
Yep.
We have this thought
Yeah.
And that is lodged there. And as I say these words, I'm thinking back to those early, well, back as I can remember. So for me to now look at that new, that's a tremendous concept.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a book in my office you're welcome to come look at it called Jesus, the Illustrated Jesus. Oh, yeah, Jeremy?
Can you repeat what he said? We can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna pass this around next time. Elwood was saying that we've had this image of the Caucasian, the white God in our minds since we were 3. I like to call it the Northern European Jesus, right? And Jeremy has a wonderful picture of the Northern European Jesus, I think, in his office. And we struggle with that because every culture actually thinks of Jesus looking like them. That's what that book I was talking about, if you want to come look at it, it's really interesting. But the reality is Jesus probably looked like a Palestinian does today. Maybe a little darker because, we're not sure what 2,000 years does, but just to keep that in mind. Yep. Other thoughts about this idea of Jesus or as our ability to care for other things? Because you have to, in my mind, well, I shouldn't say you have to. In my mind, it's essential to accept that premise when we think about caring for creation. If we think about the closer we are to God, quote unquote, in terms of our creation, our createdness, the closer we are to God is our ability to care for other things, especially those things that are less powerful than us. That then sets up this idea of we need to care for creation. And by the way, God uses creation in this story, and I get that, these are, I'm trying not to use the fancy word of etiology. These are these kind of foundational stories that we tell to kind of explain this stuff, but at the same time, I think there's something to that. And we can come back to this. And yep, Elwood, one more. Wait. Here, can I give this to you, Andrew?
I'm wondering, in terms of knowing that the ELCA has had a social statement since 1993 called Care for Creation, in terms of what you're saying, is that new approach to the idea of image brought out in those helps that are provided for us to grapple with that social statement?
I don't know. I'll have to read
look
it.
That up and see.
No,
I have all that background.
Pastors
material.
are notoriously bad and at reading these. When Larry Teeley was here, Pastor Larry Teeley, he asked me, "Have you read aloud Bishop Eaton's statement on this and that and this and that?" I'm like, "No." No. Oh, yep. So it would be good for us to think about doing that. You're right. Okay. So our relationship. This is kind of these foundational statements. Our relationship with God is based in creation. Okay. So some of our basic assumptions, and then notice I have Hebrews 11 down there, kind of guiding us. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God. Just this is through, I could have had 30 verses that said the same sort of thing. Basically, this is foundational to our belief. Whether you believe that creation was completed in 6 days or 6 millennia or whatever, right? However you believe creation was done, we still believe God is the creator, okay? So, because I've taught this at the college level, and there are not many college students who believe that creation was done in 6 days. But there are Christian college students who will say, yes, but I believe God is creator. It just maybe doesn't happen exactly the way in those 6 days, et cetera, et cetera. So some of our basic assumptions: God's creation of us, that we are created beings. That we don't sort of spring to life without there being sort of this kind of spark from God. That's what I was just saying about, people not believing necessarily in the 6 days of creation, but we believe that we are created. We don't, that there's an intention to this in a way. That we live in God's creation. That's something I think sometimes we forget. We surround ourselves, especially when we live in the city. It's so easy to surround ourselves with all these man-made things, and our lives are kind of driven by man-made or human-made things from the beginning of our day to the end of our day, and we forget how important creation is. Elwood?
Is it not fair to say that to understand what we read here, remembering this is a Hebrew document, that we need to think like a Hebrew and not to think like a Greek? I mean, most of us, we think like Greek, which asks the question, how? Whereas if we think like a Hebrew, we ask the question, why?
Yeah, and actually, as I was writing this, I was thinking about different cultures' approach, Native American cultures' approach, Asian approaches to, Marie Kondo. Have you guys watched any Marie Kondo stuff on Netflix? She does this sort of cleaning stuff. And so they'll gather all the books and then she'll pat them to wake them up, right? But everything has a soul for her. And then you think about, when I've watched Native American representations in film and other ways, when they kill a deer and then they honor the deer's soul, so we don't do that. I mean, nothing has soul for us except for us. So in that way, yes, we are Greek, but I mean Hebrew understanding or other understandings I think would be really important to start to say, yep, this has a soul. By the way, there's been kind of an ongoing discussion about doing some changing of kind of our worship space, sanctuary spiff committee, and there was talk about getting a new font, and there was a couple people who said, well, some people really like this font, and so we think, oh, it's this. For me, it's the the way we've always done it, and maybe it's time for a new. I sometimes think that way, but I sometimes forget that this font itself, while people may like it, it kind of has a soul in a way. I mean, it's this shared sort of meaningfulness. I mean, how many people have had their children baptized at this font? And the fonts that we looked at were really cool, I'll admit. I mean, I was excited about some of this stuff, but at the same time, I get this sort of tension that if we got a new font, we would have to kind of almost have a funeral for this particular. Does that make sense? We'd have to almost say goodbye to it. We couldn't just wheel it out and put it in the garbage can. I was at a church where their old worship furniture they kept, and they put the pulpit in the garage of the parsonage. I, of course, because they were Nebraskans and they had told me a couple times about how much they like to drink beer. I said, "Oh, is this where you put the kegs?" Because it was one of those big circular pulpits. But they couldn't let go. They did not want to just walk away from this worship furniture, and I get that now a little bit more because that worship furniture had a soul. It's kind of like when we get rid of stuff, we want to make sure that it finds a new home, right? Think about that for a second. We want a home. We want to make sure that our old items find a new home, right? So that's part of what I think we miss, is that we live in God's creation, not in humankind's creation. And we don't honor stuff. We don't give stuff the soul that it deserves, maybe. Any thoughts about that or any personal reflections?
Well, sure, I'll just share. When I hear that, I think about some of the things I've read, like Tintin in Tibet, where it seems like every rock is animated and has some spiritual presence. When I was a young adult, I had a chance to travel to French West Africa, to this area called Dogon country in Mali. And Diane just shared with me an old National Geographic article about this place, and it's very much the same thing about how in some cultures, especially things in nature, they have a spirit associated with them. You have to be really careful when you're visiting places that you not do something that's really offensive to other people.
Yeah.
What you do with respect to your surroundings makes a lot of difference to those cultures.
Yep, I agree.
I just finished reading Braiding Sweetgrass with the St. John group that meets monthly, one book a month. And that is written by a Native woman. And I think she would have taken a different tack to the whole concept of this, which is that they don't perceive humans as somehow better than all the rest of creation or superior. In fact, many times the humans are called the little brothers or the little sisters. We are learning from our older brothers, which is the natural world and all the aspects of it. And we are being cared for by that. We're not caring for it. We should be reciprocal, but it's really taking care of us, and we are the little children. And that was a kind of a mind-opening thing and kind of quite different from the Genesis concept.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and she also would capitalize the word, you know, when she was talking about trees, maples would have a capital M, because an individual maple would just be a low, you know, a lowercase. But the whole concept of that plant or that animal, that type of thing, would be given the status of, you know, a capitalized
Yeah.
noun. So.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that. And then the third basic assumption that we also kind of believe in this promise, God's promise for us is to make a new creation. So there's this tension as well, and we can't, I almost didn't put this one in, but we can't deny this, that there is this sort of promise at the end of the Christian, you know, sort of, you know, narrative that this is, God will make a new creation. So we kind of live in that tension of, yes, we do the best we can, but it's not, we do not have to perfect this. We do not have to, you know, make this, we don't have to live perfectly in the world. I think if we aim toward perfect, we do better than if we don't. And then just a couple other, and these are kind of bigger philosophical points in a way, but important to name. God, when we talk about God, we say God in and through creation. And so the fancy word is panentheism. I have two fancy words coming up, sorry, but panentheism, so you've heard of pantheism, right? That means God and the world are kind of the same. We believe that God and the world are the same, but that God exists beyond the world. If you could think of two circles, one smaller inside of a bigger one, that would be the better way to think about it. But that's important to remember is that, and this is the next one, and I have my big word up there still, ubiquitous, which means everywhere, omnipresent. The word, meaning Jesus, is omnipresent. So Jeremy and I were talking about when I do communion, he said, well, I think there are some people who are opening up their little cups and in eating the bread and the wine before you actually say the words of institution, Pastor Eric. And I said, well, that's okay, because Jesus is already present. There's no magical moment that happens up there when we do communion. Actually, the word hocus pocus, you guys have heard this phrase, hocus pocus, it comes from the Latin hoc est corpus. Are any of you old enough and Catholic enough to know what that means? Hoc est corpus. This is the body. And so when the Catholic priests before Vatican II would hand out just the body, remember, just the bread, they would say, hocus corpus, hocus pocus, hocus corpus, right? And there was the magic happening, that magic moment where it would turn into Christ, right? We believe Christ is already present in everything because the Word is present in creation, because God is present in creation, right? And this is an important, if we're going to respect creation, if we think that God is already present in creation, I think it helps us maybe take a second, before we toss something in the trash that maybe could go in the recycle bin. It's just a little inconvenient for us to have to, do whatever we have to do, right, to get it there, to get it in the right place. Does that make sense? So that's why this is I know that those are big fancy words. They will not be on the test. But it's important for us to remember that God is present in and through creation. Is that something you've heard before? Is it helpful to think about it that way? Elwood wants to say something, I think.
Well, I think of the words, in our Lutheran understanding of the body and blood of Christ. It's in, with, and under.
Right.
And then we might say, well, now what does that mean? But
Yeah.
is that the struggle of the church to try to communicate this mystery
Right.
that we use those three prepositions?
Well, yeah, when we talk about communion, basically the most important thing is that Christ is present. That's, bottom line. I mean, all these words are just our ways of trying to figure it out. But, for me, it's just bottom line. God is present in creation. God is present in communion. When we remember that God is there, then it's easier to start thinking about, okay, this font has a soul, that we are maybe just the little brothers of creation, that creation might have more wisdom than us, right? Some of these things that are kind of scandalous for us to say, but they might be helpful for us as we start to think about how we care for creation. I want to move on to, I want to talk about this 126, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over this idea that we are given dominion over creation. We are given the stewardship of creation. So we talked about this already. Our relationship with creation is a reflection of God's relationship with us. So then the question, I think, for us to start asking is, how do we treat creation? Do we treat it in symbiotic ways? So as you know, symbiotic is, kind of like the plover birds who eat the stuff out of the alligator's teeth, right? So the alligator doesn't get gum disease, right? All right, come on. Don't fail me now. Uh-oh. My batteries might be dying. Does someone want to go back? Andrew, could you go back and push spacebar on the computer closest to the camera on the tripod? I think that'll do it. Sorry about this. Did that work? Dun, dun, dun. So anyways, symbiotic meaning, if I can find my phone, I can pull it up on that. How are we caring for creation in a way that recognizes how creation is caring for us? Does that make sense? Any thoughts on that? I'm going to run back and try to just get this whole slide up. Is creation something we honor and respect, or is creation something we simply use to satisfy our needs and wants? Right? Do we buy what's convenient for us, or do we think about the results of what we do? Does that make sense? Are we even trying? Just think through your lives. Do we even try to kind of hang on to stuff rather than just buy a new one? Or do we buy a cheap one and then just throw it away when we're done? And I know this makes life much harder. I get that. But these are some of the questions I want us to start asking, and I think the Care for Creation Committee is wanting us to ask too. Do these questions make sense? Any thoughts about them? Oh, Sandy? Yep. Oh, wait, do you want to get the mic here to Sandy?
If we're going to care for creation, we have to care about how it's made and why it's made. If you want to buy something, you might want to spend a little bit more if it's created humanely, fairly.
Thank you, Dawn.
how the people in the area are respected or not respected. So I think it does matter if we care about creation and what God's laid out there for us.
Totally agree. I had a friend from college who wouldn't buy things until he could buy something that was of better quality. And so, and at the time, I would sometimes buy cheaper things and then wait for the better thing and then buy the better thing. And I realized that his was probably the better way. And there's a part of that is white privilege as well, for us to just kind of acknowledge that it's easy for us, maybe not white privilege, but economic privilege. It's easier for folks who have more money to do that. And it's harder if we don't have a lot of money to do that, and so we have to kind of make that tension. But I think it's an important point for us to remember that sometimes it's better to wait and buy something that's better quality, and then also push the folks who are making things to make better quality, so that then we can hold on to them longer, don't have to kind of keep recycling them. Did you have another point, Sandy? Nope. Okay. Other ways, is creation something we honor and respect, or is creation something we simply use to satisfy our needs and wants?
Our whole economy regards everything in nature as a commodity, pretty much, including the air and water. Everything's a commodity, and that's where a lot of the problems come from.
Yep. Yeah, no, I would agree. It's, the idea that our world is basically transactional, and it's all about commodities. I mean, even education, I have friends who are professors, and they talk about the commodification of education. It's become a commodity. It's no longer about learning itself for many students. It's just about getting the grade. They paid their money, they want their grade. Does that make sense? So there's this commodification that's happened. And so for all of these questions for me come out of this idea that we have been given, and I'm using the NRSV word, dominion over creation. But what does that dominion mean? I mean, the other way we could talk about that is stewardship. We've been given the stewardship of creation. How are we good stewards of creation? So then the next question is extension of ourselves. Is creation something we think of and value as a living organism, or do we treat it as an object that we are not a part of? So this is why, for me, it was very important to bring in the pantheism, the Jesus present in creation piece, because I think it's very easy for us to say, well, it's just a piece of wood, or it's just a thing. It's just an object. It's not something that has a soul, quote unquote, or that God is present in at any level. Do we think of creation as an extension of ourselves? So in Hindu belief system, now granted, Hindu belief system is about as wide as can be, but part of their belief system is samsara, which is a recycling of yourself, your body, back into the world, and then reincarnation, right? Then you are reincarnated. And so then, according to the kind of the basic Hindu worldview, how you live, karma, right? How your actions then determine where you end up in being reincarnated, right? But the idea is that when you die, all of your molecules end up back in the world. You're always part of the world, and you see what I mean? So you're never sort of like separate from the world. And we talk about our souls go up to heaven, right? And what about our bodies? Finnish Lutherans, by the way, are much more severe about this. Yeah, I mean Finnish Lutherans meaning Lutherans that live in Finland now. And this is actually There is biblical evidence for this, but they don't believe that your soul goes to heaven when you die. When you die, you're dead. That's it. And then when Christ comes again, you will be raised from the dead. So there is no sort of soul. Grandma's not up in heaven looking down on us. Grandma's just dead. And then when Christ returns, Grandma will be raised from the dead. Because it does, in some ways, that honors that idea that we're part of creation and we don't get to sort of escape up to heaven right away. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? Just sort of this easy way out. Other thoughts about these two? Yep, Fred? Oh, wait, let's get the mic to you if we can. Sorry. We've got 3 folks online here, and then I don't know how many on Facebook, and they really appreciate it when we get ourselves mic.
So one thought I've had about creation and the 6 days of creation is it wouldn't have to be based on a 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And all of these different effects of creation could be tied into the original creation.
Yeah. Yes, Don?
When I was, the one thing that I appreciate about COVID is how this extension of ourselves, the national parks, have become so much more important. Now, whether or not we respect it and keep that going, but I just appreciate that we're, that part of our life, that we have those possibilities.
Yep. Yeah, parks aren't really exciting things when you're doing city planning. And I'm sure there are folks who are thinking to themselves, like Central Park in New York, like, oh, look at all that real estate. If we could just sell it, right? How many billions and trillions of dollars would that be worth? But I'm sure there are many New Yorkers, most New Yorkers would say, do not touch it. But we forget how important these parks are. I grew up really close to Sibley State Park by Wilmer, and totally realize now that I haven't lived close to a state park, how much I just kind of took that for granted, to have that amazing thing there. So when we think about creation, just kind of keep this in mind, that there's a symbiotic, not only are we benefit from creation, but then how are we also giving back to creation? So you see what I mean? It's got to be symbiotic. It's got to be, we are living together, right? We can't stop eating food, but we can eat food mindfully, right? We can do it carefully. One of the things I'm hoping is that this spring, summer, they have community gardening that happens here in Fargo-Moorhead, and it's pretty cool stuff, and I'm hoping we get a bunch of folks from St. John to go do that, for example. That'd be one example of how we might live in a more symbiotic way. Planting trees. Trees are not that expensive. And if you buy them, when they're smaller, it's, there's all these little things that we could do which would give back to creation, right? They won't cost us much even, if you're coming at it from an economic standpoint, but they can it really matters. It's like Sandy was sharing how in Anchorage, there was just kind of this general gloom, and then Anchorage started to say, okay, everybody put up a string of white lights and we'll give you some off your utility bill. And it kind of raised the whole mood of the city, right? Sandy, that's right? And it's a little thing, and it doesn't cost that much on either end, but it can really matter. And so we can start to think about those little things we can do that can really matter to start to change our relationship with creation. And then just to keep in mind, I love that idea, that Marie Kondo stuff of when she was first tapping the books to wake them up, I'm like, what is she doing? But this whole idea that everything has a soul, can we start to look at it that way? So then this is kind of this extended part from Genesis where I wanted to basically read verse 31. You can read this at home, but this idea, God saw everything that he had made or she had made, and indeed it was very good. It's not perfect. Right? You think about God and you think perfection, right? God is perfect. Everything, God is eternal, God's omniscient, right? God's omnipresent, God's everywhere, all-knowing, perfect, eternal. But yet here is this creation that God has made, and it's not perfect. It's instead very good. Any thoughts about that? So this is a line I have. This is often, or not often, this is sometimes used for weddings. This particular sort of male and female, God created them, this, right? And then I will remind the couple that that creation is very good, not perfect. Like their marriages, if they're good, that's awesome, because their marriages will never be perfect, right? So, because think about that relationship we have with the earth. It's never going to be perfect. But if it points toward perfect, if it gets to good or very good, we're doing really well. So that was kind of the main point, because it's easy for us, I think, sometimes to think, oh, we have to completely fix this and do it perfectly. But even if we do small things, it matters. And then I wanted to remind us too what Luther says in the Small Catechism. So we believe in Apostles' Creed, we say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. That's a whole article of our creed, is to just name that God is creator. So for Luther, God has created me together with all that exists. God has given me and still preserves my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all limbs and senses, reason, and all mental faculties. So I don't know if we often kind of wake up and name God as our creator, but this is part of Luther's Small Catechism. Some of you maybe even memorized this once upon a time, going through confirmation, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Jessica. Oh, yes, I know they've updated the language, haven't they? Yeah, they keep doing it. And then, in addition, now notice this part. God daily and abundantly provides shoes and clothing, food and drink, God protects me from all dangers, preserves me from evil. All this is done out of pure fatherly and divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness of mine at all. And this because for Luther, this understanding of Genesis as about capacity for relationship and capacity for caring is kind of implicit, and that shows up right here. I mean, when we say, we pray for our daily bread, when we talk about creation for Luther, that means that God does all of this or provides all of this out of God's love for us. And then we are also then invited back in that last line, for all of this I owe it to God to thank and praise, serve and obey God. This is most certainly true.
Another comment based on the Braiding Sweetgrass book that I highly recommend to all of you. She talked about a native Thanksgiving kind of liturgy that one culture does. It's like the Iroquois nation, I believe. And they had this long list they would go through, thanking all of the different parts of creation. And they had to do this whenever they had group meetings. And when they included non-native people, all the other non-native people would be rolling their eyes and looking at their phones and watches because they couldn't believe how long it went on and dragged on. But they went through all of creation it was a gratitude thing. And, this whole idea of commodities is different if you change that into gifts. And this part of the Small Catechism acknowledges all of these things as gifts. And think of what you do. You have a piece of something in your house, an object that somebody gave you.
Yeah.
That's a lot harder to give away or throw in the trash or take to the thrift store than something you just bought yourself.
Yeah.
It's a gift and you think more about it. And I think that concept really applies here.
Yeah. Yep. No, just wait, yeah, so that caption at the top of this slide is creation as a gift. That was kind of the point of that so I appreciate you highlighting that stuff. And I love the idea of thanking, of doing this sort of Thanksgiving. So in my house, we still say prayers before every meal. At least when I'm there, we do. I don't know about when I'm gone. But I think there's an importance to that. And then at night, we say prayers and we try to do gratitudes. What are we thankful for? Right? And I think there's a wisdom to that practice. It was handed on to me by someone else, but I've kind of kept it. But that's something that, for me, the word gratitude, it shares a root with the word grace. And so whenever you talk about gratitude, you're naming how you are graced. Does that make sense? So naming gratitudes is an important part of, because we as Northern American folks who are, most of us descended from European, heritage, we are kind of trained, and our narrative is to be the best and to be in charge, right? But to take a moment to understand how we got to where we are because of other things, to start naming the ways that we are graced. Remember, grace is something that's given to you, like Luther says, without any merit or worthiness of mine at all. So when we name how we are graced, we're naming how we get something without having earned it or deserving it. And that's an important thing for us, especially here in the upper Midwest. We don't like to get stuff that we haven't paid for or we don't deserve, right? I think there's this sort of ethic about that. And so if someone does that for us, then we owe them, right? Have you ever gone over to somebody's house for dinner and not brought anything? Right? That's hard for us, isn't it? We have these friends of the family who are from Norway, and whenever we would go over to dinner at their place, they would say, yeah, don't bring anything. And my mom would always bring something, of course, and it would drive the hostess nuts, because she's like, I planned the whole thing. I don't need you guys. You are our guests. We are hosting you, So it's an important thing for us to start naming gratitudes, to start naming things we're thankful for. And I love the idea of taking time to do it. You're totally right. We are so, the Northern European sense of time, too. When I did my doctoral work at the Lutheran Seminary in Chicago, there was one class that was on mission and violence in Central and Southern America. And there were a lot of Latin American students who took that course. And my professor would often remind the whole class, okay, we're taking a break, and this is North American time, folks, not Latin American time. 10 minutes, North American time. Because Latin American time, a break was a break, and they might come back half an hour to an hour later. They were taking a break. And so I love that idea of kind of breaking down some of those long-held traditions we have. And then this is what I'm ending it with, because this is one of my favorite things to remind myself. Do you all know the story of Job? So Job is where we get the line, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Have you heard that before? And then do you know what the next part of that is?
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So Job, of course, has a family who curses God and dies. And then God allows, I'll put that in quotes, I keep on using my air quotes, sorry, allows Satan, Ha-Satan, the questioning one, to torment Job, but not to kill him. And so this happens, and Job's friends basically blame him for everything that happens. And at the end, Job gets a little cheeky and starts to ask God, why did you let this happen? Why? Starts kind of questioning God and really giving God the business. So this is God's answer to Job, which if you haven't read, you should, because if you have, especially if you have children, this is an important line. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? I mean, what a great line. Darkens counsel by words without knowledge. And then gird up your loins like a man, I will question you, and you shall declare to me. And then this is where we're reminded of our place in the world. For me, when I've taught college courses, I've often had folks who believe in the theory of evolution. Notice I used the word theory. It's way closer to scientific fact than what I actually believe, and I get that, but it's still a theory. No one was there at the beginning of time. No one knows exactly how it happened. These are just good guesses. And this is ancient Hebrew reminder of that. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Like the sarcasm? I do. And you can read the rest of it. And I love the last line, when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy at creation, at the moment of creation. And I think sometimes we forget that we are, I'm thinking of, if you guys have seen the Avengers movie, when Hulk takes Loki and smashes him a bunch, and then says puny God, right? We forget that we're just these puny insects. I think it's Tennyson, nature red in tooth and claw. Right? Does anybody know Tennyson well or know that line? But the idea, I mean, if you've ever been out in nature and actually started to worry you weren't going to make it back, has anybody been in that situation? I've been there. I've been up in the Bighorn Mountains when it snowed over 10,000 feet and got a little worried about getting out. This is before cell phones. So we got a little worried about getting back. That's when you start to remember how small, because we live in this little protected world. You know, we have all these, blizzard warnings and snow tires and all, and we cancel things. We keep ourselves very protected, and we forget that creation is bigger and stronger and more powerful than us. Maybe a little bit back to this, we're the little brothers, right, Diane? Yeah, and we forget that. And I think there's a little bit of that might help us as we venture into this care for creation for an entire year, is to remember that creation is bigger than us. And one of the things that the climatologists are telling us is that if we don't stop it, we will really pay a price. The joke that New York will be underwater by 2050. Think about that. All of New York being underwater by 2050. May happen, may not happen, but there's a little bit of a tweak for us here, I think, to remember that we're not as powerful as we think we are. and to remember that God is really God. God has done creation. And who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? So to remember that God is there and creation is there as part of God's work in the world. And we're part of that creation, but we're also tasked with caring for it. I don't know if you guys like this line from Job 38. This is one of my favorite. I love Job 30. Job is also where there's this totally a tangent. Lutherans believe in the hiddenness of God, that right when you need God the most, God disappears. There's a great line from Job 23, 8 and 9, where Job is lamenting that he's looking for God. He needs God. He needs something to hold on to. And I look on the left, he is not there. I look behind me, I cannot perceive him. I look to the right, he's gone. Right? This idea that God has just disappeared. But that doesn't mean God has disappeared from what we can control, but God is not absent. That's why we talk about the hiddenness of God. God is still present. Other thoughts? I think that was my last slide. Yep, that's my last slide. Other thoughts about what we talked about today? So when Dennis and some of the other folks who kind of do the Care for Creation committee, when we were talking about that, we wanted to just kind of get some of this biblical stuff. That we're doing this very intentionally. This is part of our identity as Christians, I think. It's in Genesis. It's throughout the Bible. Like I said, I could have found 30, 50 references where God is talking about creation. And so for us to declare this for a year it's not crazy or out of bounds by any means. Oh yeah, Dennis has something to say.
Yeah, I just want to express my gratitude to you, Eric, for setting aside a whole year for this. And to some people, maybe it seems like a lot of time for Care for Creation. I guess some ways to think of it, creation is infinite, right? But also the ways that we're impacting our own part of the creation, I think it's really very sobering. I think there's good reason to listen to what our scientists are telling us about the future. But there's also a lot of things that we can do in response to that. in thinking about creation, I suppose you could say there's the natural part of creation, and then there's the man-made part of creation. And one of my fears is that younger generations are living so very much in the man-made part of creation, they're missing out on the natural part of creation. And I think that's the part of creation that I think we're really in danger of losing, that natural part of creation. It's disappearing in our lifetime. I think some of the things that climate change is doing is it's hastening that loss of the natural part of God's creation and our ability to experience it. I think about this summer in Fargo. There were quite a few days when there was so much smoke being blown from these wildfires, and scientists are saying the climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of these wildfires, and it's affecting us. And we're already being limited on the amount of time we can be outdoors experiencing the natural part of creation. And we see this all over the world. Wildfires are getting to be so severe that people who have been able to live out in nature more, experience nature more by living out in wooded areas, they're going to have to give that up because those areas are becoming so dangerous. And people enjoy living on coastal areas. They're experiencing more severe hurricanes, and there's entire communities that are basically going to have to move away from the coastlines because of climate change. Diane is hinting that I've talked too much, so I'll stop.
Yeah, so there's a lot. So ways you can get involved this year for those who are watching online or those who are here. The book clubs are going to be some of the easier ways. We're also going to have a variety of kind of movies that we'll be showing with the Care for Creation Committee leading the way. And then there'll be a number of activities we've talked about, like the community gardening. I'd love to figure out some way to organize buying trees. We've talked about maybe getting a bunch of LED light bulbs and kind of just giving them away to people to help them convert their house faster, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have, you don't have to be part of the Care for Creation Committee. If you have ideas, send them to Dennis or me or other folks who you might know who are on that committee. And then just kind of keep your eye out for things that we're doing. And above all, just keep praying for us as a community and for yourselves, how you might see how you can be more a part of this sort of good stewardship effort in the world and learning about that. So any last thoughts or ideas? We've got about 20 minutes here before worship, and I know that for us who lead worship, it's always easier to have a little bit more time. So, well, thank you all for coming and for your energy and support. Like I said, if you have ideas, because we know we don't have a monopoly of ideas, and so we're going to do our best. But if you know of things people are doing in other churches, other communities, other ideas, if you want to help with any of the projects we're going to do, just talk to Dennis or me or someone else on Care for Creation. So thank you very much for being here, and next Sunday, I'm not here. I don't know if we're having an adult forum per se, but then two Sundays from today, we will have an adult forum. I think you're leading that one, Dennis, right? Yep.
Yeah, just a quick ad for the 2 weeks from now. We'll be having a conversation on climate change. We'll show a little short YouTube video to, I think a lot of us are concerned about climate change, but we don't really share our concerns with other people. We maybe don't even feel comfortable about talking about it with others. There's a really great YouTube video about 17 minutes long. We'll start off with that, and then hopefully have a conversation among ourselves on climate change.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone. Oh, and today the book club organizational meeting's at 11:45 on Zoom or here? Okay.
Right, in the parlor, but it will be accessible through Zoom.
Bye, folks on Zoom.